This is section 2.1 and 2.2 on solving one-step equations. I hope everybody did well in their test. This should be a fairly short lesson and a review for most people. So when we think about solving equations, there's a couple things that we want to do. The first, we think about how do we want to get x alone here. We think about undoing the operations that are happening. So there's multiple ways to represent undoing an operation. When we think about adding 5, how do we undo that? Well, we could subtract 5, or I could add a negative 5. Both are correct. Both would be fine. It just kind of depends on what you're more comfortable with. Do you change subtraction to addition? That kind of stuff. The more interesting one is kind of how do we undo multiplying by 8? Two ways to kind of think about this. First way, divide by 8, and that's the way most people would probably do it. Second way is we could multiply by the reciprocal. Remember, dividing by 8 is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal, which is 1/8 here. So we'll take a look and see which one is better. So we start off with example 1 here. We have x plus 4 equals negative 10. First thing I want to do is I do want to tend to put a line down the middle, keep my equal signs lined up. Now, one-step, two-step equations, you don't need it as much. However, when we get into multiple step ones, it is a good thing to do. Helps keep things aligned here. So we have a left side and the right side. So I ask myself, x plus 4, it's adding 4, so I think about undoing that. Undoing adding 4 would be to either subtract 4 or add a negative 4. Either one would be fine. And of course the rule is whatever I do to one side I have to do to the other. I have the equal sign there, so I have to do the same thing to both sides. Now one thing that we do have to do is, since we are going to add down, we do have to put a line there to signify that we are doing that. X plus 0 is simply x. The x comes down here. And I have a plus 4 and a minus 4, or 4 minus 4, which is 0. Now, for most of you, do you have to put the 0 there? No. However, at this point, I am putting it down just so we reinforce that it's 4 and a negative 4 is 0. We get x plus 0, that's just x, and we get x is negative 14. Fairly straightforward. Looking at B, we have a subtraction problem then. We're thinking about it the same way. Put my line, I have x minus 5, so the opposite of subtracting 5 would be adding 5. Okay. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides eventually. There we go. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Whatever I do to one side I have to do to the other. Put my line down across, signifying that I am adding down. X comes down, there's nothing there. Negative 5 and a positive 5 is 0. And 8 and 5 is, of course, 13. X plus 0 is 13, so I have x is 13. I should box it up or circle it to signify that I am done here. Okay. The last one here, a little bit tricky in terms of the wording and in terms of the thought process here. I have negative 12 plus x is negative 5. Now, I'm adding a negative 12. Okay. So you could think about it a couple ways. Okay, you could think about it and just say, okay, that's a negative 12. How do I get rid of a negative 12? I would add 12. Or if you're thinking about undoing adding negative 12, that would be subtracting negative 12. Subtracting negative is really adding. So adding 12 here, I would add 12 to both sides. When I add down, I get 0 plus x, which is of course just 0, and negative 5 plus 12. Thought process, which are there more of? There's more positives. How many more positives? 7 here. So I get x is 7. And again, I circle it or I box it up. It's up to you, doesn't matter to me. So on to the multiplication ones and division. Same type of thing that we're going to be doing here. We're thinking about undoing the operation. So in example 2 here, I have 2x equals negative 10, and 2x is 2 times x. I'm going to put my line down the middle, and if it's 2 times x, I undo it. Undo multiply by 2 with dividing by 2. Okay. I put the line right there to show that I'm dividing by 2. If I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. Now 2 divided by 2 is just 1x. Okay. Again, do you have to put the 1 there? No. For right now, I am just reminding us that 2 divided by 2 is 1. I am actually going to do that. I get x equals -5. And again, pretty straightforward stuff you've seen before. Now if I look at b, there is a little bit of trickiness in this one. When I multiply by 4 here, okay, I multiply it to both sides because it's dividing by 4. Now the thing I have to remember is, okay, how do I multiply 4 times x over 4? Okay, I have to put it over 1. When I do that, I do get 4x over -4. And again, on the other side, I get this. But here's the problem. Oh, I have a negative there. How do I adjust that? If I divide it by -4, I have to multiply by -4. So I have to have a -4. If I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other there. So that has to be a -4 as well here. Again, don't forget about those little things that we do here. -4 times 8 is a -32. And if I look on the other side, -4 over -4, negative divided by negative is a positive. So I get 1x, or x is -32. Again, circle it or box it up. It's up to you. So the next one, C and D, same problem written two different ways to think about this here. If I look at C here, the first one, I have 2/5. Okay? This is one of those where it's probably easier to multiply by the reciprocal. So 2/5, the reciprocal is 5/2. Remember reciprocal, I flip it, top becomes bottom becomes top here. I'm going to multiply both sides by that. When I do this, when I simply multiply across, I do get 10/10. Okay, which is what we want. Why? What is 10/10? Well, we'll get to that in a second here. Since I'm doing it to both sides, I do multiply across -30/2. So the 10/10 here is just 1. That's what we want. We want 1 times x, which is just x. -30/2, -30 divided by 2 is -15. So I do get x is -15 here. Again, okay, I could have done it this way. A little bit different. Okay, you end up with the same result here. I could have thought of it as 2x over 5. How do I get rid of the 5? Well, I multiply by 5. It's dividing by 5, I would multiply by 5. If I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. And now I get this. In this case, the 5's are going to cancel out. Could I have gotten 10/5 and gotten 2? Sure, I could have cross-canceled those as well. I do get 2x over 1, which is just 2x. On the other side, I do get 5 times -6, which is -30. Now I have 2x. I divide by 2 on both sides. And I get 1x is -15, or just x is -15. Again, you do get the same thing here. It's just your preference there. With fractions, it tends to be a little bit easier to multiply by the reciprocal. If I just have numbers, it might be easier to divide. That is up to you. Okay. Good luck on the homework. If you have any questions, let me know.